Love, like justice, is reputed blind. Despite all the warnings, between All Hallows and Christmas, 1560, a year after the mother's death, Hertford solemnly pledged his troth to me and presented me with a plain gold ring. And so, in the presence of Lady Jane Seymor only, and in her chamber in Westminster Palace, we were formally betrothed with no ceremonies, as Edward afterwards admitted, beyond kissing and embracing each other and joining our hands together before his sister. A little later in December, while Jane was in her private sitting room, a large apartment which no one was allowed to enter without her leave, she received a letter from her brother, which said that he was very ill, lovesick, and must see me at once. Would she receive him in her chamber, as he wished to open his heart to me? Jane sent one of the little maids to him saying that he was to follow her. Half an hour later, we were reunited by Jane's fireside. I, ignorant of the probable results of my foolish act, after embracing my lover many times, said, "Weighing your long suit and great goodwill towards me, I am well content, be the consequences what they may, to marry you the next time the Queen's Highness shall go abroad and leave the Lady Jane alone with me." Some 5 or 6 days after my betrothal to the Earl of Hertford, Queen Elizabeth elected to go with her train to Greenwich on a hunting expedition, and summoning her ladies and maids, ordered us to make immediate preparations to follow her. I excused myself on the plea that I was sore afflicted with toothache, and as an evidence of the fact, exhibited my swollen face tied up in a kerchief. Jane Seymor declared that she could not go hunting for she was sick with a bad headache. The unsuspecting Queen accepted these excuses and left us to our own devices. Scarcely had Her Majesty and her train left Westminster Palace, than we stole out and headed to the Earl of Hertford's house in Cannon Row. Edward had previously dispatched all his servants on various errands, some he sent into the city, others to the country, but his confidential valet was told to wait for him at a goldsmith's shop in Fleet Street. Powell, the cook, however, afterwards deposed before the council that he had seen me and the Lady Jane steal out of the Watergate stairs, and enter the Earl's chamber, to reach which we had to pass the kitchen door. In Edward's bedroom was a priest, who performed the marriage service. The clergyman was brought to the house by Jane. It was a fair-complexioned man of middle stature, with an auburn beard. He wore a garb resembling that of the foreign reformers who returned to England after Queen Mary's death, a long furred black cloth gown, with a turned-down collar of white linen. Neither Edward nor me knew the priest's name, but Jane paid him a fee of £10, out of the pocket money which her brother gave her for her clothes. He himself was short of cash at the time. Jane Seymor was the only witness when Edward gave me a wedding ring, the one already mentioned. A sort of informal wedding repast had been prepared in Edward's chamber, but I was too much unnerved to eat or drink. About 2 hours after the brief ceremony was over, Hertford escorted us down the stairs and kissed me goodbye. The tide had risen during the interval, and we were obliged to take boat back to the palace, the pathway by which we had come being underwater. We reached Westminster very early. The wedding took place in the morning, for we dined at noon as usual at the table of the controller of the household. Nobody seems to have noticed our absence, nor except the cook to have paid attention to our movements, and for a time the Queen remained in ignorance of the event. All that had happened to me on the day of my wedding was like in a dream. I couldn't tell whether it was true or I had imagined it all. Throughout the year 1561 Edward and I exchanged regular, though secret visits either at Westminster Palace or at Cannon Row. Considering myself as Hertford's wife, in my own heart, I was often in his company at sundry times by means of Jane Seymor, our angel protector, and my own maid at the time, Mrs. Lee, who was later gone from me. This woman never was bad to do it, but she would, of herself, go out of the way if she saw my lord and me whisper together. In a time when marriages were often arranged for political or social reasons, we were blessed to find true love. And in those secret moments of intimacy, while being in my beloved's arms, all my insecurity and fears for the future disappeared. It felt as if the time had stopped for us, and our happiness seemed endless. The course of true love did not flow smoothly for long, for on March 20, 1561, Jane Seymor died suddenly in her apartment at Westminster Palace. Elizabeth, who was much attached to her, and unaware of her share in my love affairs, ordered a state funeral of great splendor, and 6 days after her death, Lady Jane was buried in St. Edmund's Chapel, Westminster Abbey, where a monument was erected to her by Edward. All the Queen's ladies attended the funeral, little Mary and I were among them. Both Edward and I were heartbroken. Jane's sudden death deeply grieved me. She was my only confidant and true friend, who brought me a lot of comfort after the loss of my sister. And she was the only eyewitness at my wedding, which made the current state of my secret marital affairs even worse. It seemed to me so unfair, that in a course of just a few years I had lost almost everyone I loved. My little sister Mary and my Lord Edward were the only two people in the world I had still reason to live for. Indeed, the discretion of Hertford and mine was so great that no one appears to have realized the truth for a considerable time after the clandestine wedding had taken place, although the Secretary of the Privy Council Cecil and a few other courtiers certainly suspected that a love intrigue was afoot. About April 1561, the Queen, possibly on the advice of Cecil, who suspecting something untoward, wanted him out of the way, ordered Hertford to accompany Mr. Thomas Cecil, son of the above-named statesman, into France, where the young gentlemen were to take up certain legal studies. Hertford informed me of the trip, while I was still grieving for the loss of his sister. He took a leave at Greenwich, where the court was then staying. Before saying our goodbyes, my husband provided me with a paper, stating that he had made £1,000 in my favour before he left England. I shared with him my fears that there was a possibility I was pregnant, but I was not sure of that. For that Edward replied that I should keep him updated on the matter, and if it was the case, he would return to me earlier. So I was left alone, just to realise that soon I would no longer be able to conceal my condition. I was carrying Edward's child. So great was my terror when I became certain of this, that I mislaid the deed of jointure assigning me £1,000. In my despair I was writing numerous letters to France, informing Hertford of my condition and asking him to be back soon. Later Edward would claim that he did reply to my letters. But the fact was that I didn't receive any of those. I cannot say for sure whether they were intercepted by Elizabeth's order, or Hertford was not telling the truth, or there was another reason, but the uncertainty of my situation put me in such a state of agony that I was not able to eat or sleep, having literally no one to ease my pain. My Lord Edward did not seem to have worried much about things, since a few months later, the studious Mr. Cecil wrote to complain that his studies and meditations were considerably disturbed and interrupted by the gaieties and jaunts organized by his youthful monitor, the Earl. I concealed my pregnancy from everyone for a considerable time. But when I was in my 8th month, on receiving orders to attend the Queen during Her Majesty's progress through Suffolk, my terror became so great that I rushed one Sunday afternoon late in July to our family's old friend Bess of Hardwick, whose marriage had been the first official event I had attended. I confessed to her with bitter tears that in a few weeks I was sure to become a mother, but that I was an honest woman and was married to Lord Hertford. I hoped she would have mercy on me and plead for me with the Queen. Instead of offering consolation, Bess burst into an hysterical rage, and violently upbraided me for selecting her as the confidant of my folly. My memory had erased the agony of that day. I didn't remember what I was doing or saying. The only thought which had driven my wretched body was my baby, and what was going to become of it. And that strongest driving force in the world brought me toward midnight to the last door I could dare open to beg for help.